it seems to have a more triumphant ending in some ways, although not exactly for Moses, but it does end up he leads them out of bondage and into the land of Canaan, and so I think it's more applicable, the African American situation, where they're being held captive in their own country, in the country they live in, right? The United States, and so this idea of escaping from that bondage. Well, where can they really escape to? Well, there was a colonization movement which was part of the debates over abolition. Whereas, so I think in that sense, and it's got the Moses figure, a clear hero, which you don't have in the Exile story, which ends sort of anticlimactically, right? I mean, the exiles sort of trickle back in. It's told in Ezra and Nehemiah, trickle back, but it's not, and they do begin sort of reconstituting their culture and rebuilding the temple, but it doesn't have the same kind of grandeur. And there's this sort of strange and somewhat unpleasant episode of all the wives being put aside. So as far as political meanings, some people don't like the Exodus story, as you know. I mean, they don't like that sort of triumphant in the sense in which the Canaanites are basically being put down, right, and wiped off the map. So the exile is maybe a more appealing sort of narrative, because I mean there are these themes of coexistence in the exile. Famous lines from Jeremiah. Go, build houses, marry in, have children. Settle down into Babylon. Don't just fight it and look to get out of there. So it's a different kind of model for overcoming trauma and oppression.
Do you think part of it might be that with the Exodus, there was a Jewish hero, Moses.
Right.
And with the exile, the hero of return was King Cyrus of Persia.
Yeah,
who
exactly.
Isn't going to be probably the biggest hero for the biblical writers, but he is acknowledged as that.
Right. Does become a hero for different Christian communities. Yeah, the lead characters in the exile story, really the named character is Jeremiah, who is a sort of difficult prophet. I mean, he's I mean, I think he'd be a more interesting character in some ways than Moses. I mean, you do get a sense of depth. Not that Moses doesn't have depth, but then Ezekiel, who's really, there's all sorts of speculation. Did he have PTSD? Was he schizophrenic? I mean, so he's not exactly a marquee hero. And then you've got Daniel, who could probably figure in telling the story. I mean, he does really well in the court and stands up for his people and basically brings the king around to Yahweh. But that, Daniel is considered to have been written hundreds of years after the fact.
And I'm not sure exactly how to put this, but I wonder if another reason for the difference in the popularity of these two stories for political reasons might be that and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like in sort of Christian religion, exile is over with the redemption that comes from the resurrection, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't seem ongoing. It seems concluded in a way that, whereas the historical event of Exodus is something that can be repeated.
Right.
I don't know, like that. Yeah, but so as like part of a Christian, in most of these cases, there's a Christian identity that's being used, and you don't want to think that God has abandoned you know, this people in the way that Exile suggests from a Christian perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You know, but a lot of immigrant groups have responded to this psalm, right? Various migrations, including, I write about the Irish, Koreans, and then Cuba. You know, there's a really interesting argument about, you know, Cubans and their relationship to the United States as a kind of Babylon, and it's in the book. It's well worth reading, but I didn't make it up. I was able to draw it somebody else. But so it has been an appealing psalm, and you can find the Exile right on the base of the Statue of Liberty. I mean, Emma Lazarus's poem basically, you know, cites the Exodus story.
But Exile was, from a Jewish perspective, Exile was never quite concluded.
Right, no.
So, you know, there's no problem with using it from not that Emma Lazarus was using it in a Jewish context, but you know, as a Jewish person, she might have felt more comfortable using it than somebody who wants to,
Yeah. Jim, and then Cindy?
Yeah, you were saying, in one way, this psalm, especially the last lines, so on, are kind of something unusual, something to deal with. On the other hand, you're saying, well, there are these cursing psalms, and of course, there's a lot in the. I was thinking, for example, the story of Esther, which is what people usually emphasize is that Esther gets the king to, you know, not to carry out his plans of his minister, yeah, right, to destroy the Jews. But as I remember, at the end of that, the Jews kill their enemies, and which isn't usually emphasized tremendously. And in fact, throughout there's a lot in the Hebrew Bible about, you know, that social justice, if you want to call it that, involves not just liberating yourself, but giving your enemies their just due, which means usually killing them, like, you know, everybody. There's a lot of
and
that.
especially the babies.
Yeah,
Or
well,
especially
right.
the kids.
To just emphasize, right, just for sake of emphasis, yeah. And so am I saying this is not really, so when you are dealing with this, when we try to sanitize it and leave it out, we're really missing something significant. And certainly when you say, well, Christians don't have it, well, as you quoted Calvin saying, hey, well, look, everybody's going to get theirs at the Last Judgment. And from what we know about the right to the Last Judgment, that's not any prettier. It's maybe worse, you know. So this is an element of, and on the other hand, those versions of religion that try to excise these thoughts of retribution, revenge. No, there is no hell. Everybody's going to go to heaven. Nothing's really right or wrong. Everybody's okay. They don't seem to have too much emotional, or for that matter, I might add, intellectual or moral, or at least power to them. So I think you're raising a significant issue. That is saying, is this, in your view, I mean, I wonder if you just, I don't know, I just want to say, on the one hand, you say, well, this is an anomaly. On the other hand, isn't it just part and parcel with the whole notion that if there is justice, if remembering means remembering the good things, it also remembering who did the bad things.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to get theirs someday or some way. Or at least their descendants are going to get theirs. Or their children, their babies,
Well, and violent rage is a universal human emotion.
Yeah.
You can't cover that up. And part of the power and the appeal of the Psalms for so long and for so many different religious groups is that they do sort of, it provides the anatomy of the human soul, I think, Calvin might have said. And so, so this is a universal experience. And the Psalms express it, but what do you do with that then? You say, oh, good, I'm allowed to feel this way, and I'm vindicated, and maybe I can go out and do awful things, or is it meant to be sort of brought, a lot of theologians say, bring this emotion before God. I mean, you sort of work through it, not on your own, like how do I bring this about, but how do I deal with the fact that I have these emotions, and maybe they're very much justified. So it's a kind of beginning move in a process, I think, of spiritual effort and spiritual sort of tacking. Yeah.
In that sense, there are people who say that remember, we should break it down. Re and member. Make a member again.
Mm-hmm.
Return to what was the original harmony. Now, I find that ambiguous here because there's one line in which remember seems to be the opposite of that, and there's another in which it seems like exalting God seems to be seeing it as restoring to the original unity or harmony.
Mm-hmm.
Make a member again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Cindy, you had your...
Yeah, I was just curious from a personal standpoint, how did you come to write an entire book on the Psalm? I mean, is there more written research, scholarly efforts focused on this particular Psalm, or how did you kind of come across and decide to do this?
Well, it's one of these things where you start down this path and you find more and more to say about it, and no one had written a kind of full study of it, so scholars always like to be the first. I mean, there is quite a bit written that you have to do some digging to find, but there is no kind of full-scale treatment of it. How did I happen to spend so much time with it? There's one funny story. When I was going to my fellowship, I was crossing customs from Canada into New York, and the guy at the gate asked me, where I was going, what I was doing. I said, I'm doing a research project. Oh, what on? I said, on one of the biblical Psalms. And he said, wait, you're going to spend 8 months doing research on one Psalm? So it did sort of put it in perspective. But I ended up having plenty to write, although I am happy to say the book is not overly long. It's less than 200 pages. But I think of it as a kind of biography of a text. It came to occur to me that it's really a biography of a text that's sort of taken on a life. It's evolved. It's been thrown into different situations. And so I thought of it as really telling a biography. It's also a kind of, you could call it a reception history, because I'm looking at how different groups, different audiences, communities interpreted this, used it.
Do you think other Psalms have, if you delve deep enough, you could discover the same sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, Psalm 23, maybe the most famous of all, also by a river, right? There is a whole book written on that psalm, so that's a candidate.
Lots
Yeah.
of books.
Lots of books, yeah. So this one, I mean, there's pragmatic reasons where once you get started on a project, you kind of want to maybe string it along, and I just found such interesting material. And whenever I give a talk on this, and I have been talking about it for a while, I invariably would get some great leads from people in the audience, and I'd go, oh, I better think about that one. I mean, the whole thing with Verdi came up fairly late in the game. I'd never heard that Verdi had worked with this story, and that's kind of a big deal. So I kept getting fresh leads. The Mad Men episode came on. Oh, this is too perfect. How timely, right? Can I get the book out while people still remember Mad Men? That's the challenge.
Is the book going to come with a CD?
No, but it's going to have a website with links to lots of images and sound recordings. So yeah, that's the way they do it now. So yeah.
I just want to just re-anchor this before we finish. the exact reference for recall the Edomites is very clearly spelled out in the book of Obadiah, of
Mhm.
Obadiah,
Right.
who was an exilic prophet. And I'll just read a short section, because for violence against your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you. This is against Edom. And you shall be cut off forever on the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers carried captive his forces, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem. Even you were as one of them. But you should not have gazed on the day of your brother in the day of his captivity, nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of distress. You should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Indeed, you should not have gazed on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. You should not have stood at the crossroads to cut off those among them who escaped, nor should you have delivered to those among them who remained in the day of distress. For the Lord will, for the day of the Lord upon all the nations is near. So this is a very, he was there, or someone he talked to was there, or.
Yeah, very detailed.
This is very
right?
detailed
Yeah.
and filled with terrible, terrible rage and betrayal.
Mhm. Absolutely. And the fact that the Edomites were a tribe, were so closely related, made it,
And he says your brother,
especially painful,
right. Yeah.
right? Yes.
Hi, you mentioned that the Ashkenazi recite this on weekdays, after eating, while the Sephardi's do not. Why do you think that the Ashkenazis are more attached to remembering the exile versus the Sephardi?
Well, I misspoke, but because I believe Sephardic recited. I said not for the grace for the meal, but it's recited in full for Tisha B'Av. But as why it's not used, I couldn't say. I didn't do the research in that particular area to understand why it would have persisted in one community and not the other. That's a great question for Jewish studies. I just didn't pursue that one.
I mean, they're also, the Psalms are also read just as Psalms, like when you're praying for somebody who's sick or whatever, and, you go through a certain number of them or all of them depending on the situation. So I think that, you don't focus on those last lines, but it is part of the regular practice of both Ashkenazi and Sephardic.
Mm-hmm. And there's other cursing songs that would present real dilemmas. Is this appropriate for worship? Right? I mean, it doesn't seem to be terribly elevating or worshipful, right?
But I think the two instances you're talking about are more public, whereas like most of the instances where you would be going through the Psalms, including all the bad ones, are very private prayer situations rather than, group worship things.
Plus, it seems like in every religious text there's so many contradictions, right? Because you also have treat the stranger, as thyself or with love or whatever the exact wording is, but, treating the stranger well. You have, for everything you can find the opposite,
Exactly.
right? But in every religious text, right? So a lot of it is, how to struggle with those contradictions and how to put them in context of an era of hundreds of years ago, versus today when you talk about national movements, whether it's in the Quran or it's in the Torah or whether it's elsewhere, you have these contradictory passages, and some of them might be in terms of particular time that was 100 years ago, and you do have contradictions, though, as how you should treat people and strangers in the land and your fellow man as well. So I mean, I think this psalm brings up some of those, contradictions. But one of the interesting things, I think, in Judaism, too, is this constant argumentation with God. And a lot of people argue with God, right? Even with Stowe, would you let this many people live? How about letting, more people live, right? And you almost have this debate with God about it. So there's almost a continual debate about some of these issues in some of these contexts, which is kind of interesting as one way to deal with it.
Yeah. And the psalm is full of that. Psalms are full of that kind of dialogical quality,
Right.
just addressing God directly and answer my deepest questions and sources of pain. And some of the commentators also point out we shouldn't be too self-righteous that we've moved so far beyond this, right? I mean, because children are being killed in the name of religion and nationalism, on a daily basis, and it's and people are probably being blessed for it, or thinking that they should be blessed. So,
Well, in regard to those contradictions too, Deuteronomy 20, is it 22 or 21? 21 says, if your son is rebellious too frequently, take him out to the edge of the village and kill him. So here's the Hebrew people themselves says. What I find helpful here in what we've just been saying is there's a great deal of ambiguity in the Psalms. And I think that Americans on the whole don't handle ambiguity very well. They like a clear-cut choice, good or evil. That's why we love sports so much. There's a clear answer on that. But the Psalms really help me understand different ways of handling ambiguity. And you've helped in regard to this one, because I just simply didn't know all of the stuff that you were using on this.
And on the other hand as well, you pointed out in your lecture that the vast majority of Jews don't interpret, as Christians and Muslims don't believe that targeting innocence is legitimate in today's world, right? So the interpretation of these texts by current rabbis, ministers, and imams is not that, kids get killed. Yes, kids get killed in every war, but there's no sanctioning of an intentional killing of kids by the vast majority of religious leaders, right? So, or members of that, religion who execute this. So so on one hand, there's ambiguity. On the other hand, there's very little ambiguity, I would argue, and I'm just raising that as a contrast, perhaps, by religious theologians of all three monotheistic religions as to what the proper way to conduct wars in today's world is.
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm writing a book on the moral dilemmas of means of war right now, and I don't do it from a religious perspective, but I would think that in one sense there's little ambiguity about intentionally, targeting civilians.
absolutely,
I don't know,
yeah.
right? I mean,
No, I've not heard anyone coming out strongly in favor of.
right. So,
Well, I wouldn't say you haven't heard anyone.
They do.
I seem to me they're an influential minority.
right.
It does
Right.
prove, and we hear
Yeah.
about it all the time. So
Right.
let's not sanitize this.
Right.
Turning to the psalm, not turning to the psalm as a sanction, though, saying, well.
Oh, no, they're not doing it. I don't hear the Jews doing it, no.
No.
It happens to the Jews.
Yeah.
Well, very
I would
few
say.
ultra-Orthodox, but very, very small minority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well.
On that happy note.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think you did a fabulous job, and I think
Yeah,
it inspires us to want to read the book and
Yeah, there's
learn
so
about
much
it.
more.
So,
I've just
yeah.
skimmed the surface.
So,
So please.
yeah, we look forward to
Keep it in mind in a
reading
few
your book,
months.
and thank you so much for sharing.
This was a great audience and really good questions and comments. A real pleasure. That's what this is all about.
Please pick up flyers on your way out if you're interested in future events that are going on.